Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the Patient Safety Authority, I'd like to welcome you to this web conference titled The Compelling Connection Between Staff Safety and Patient Safety. My name is Megan Shetterly, and I will be your moderator for this program. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker for the webinar, Deborah Grubbe, consultant with DuPont Sustainable Solutions. Deborah has over 35 years experience in the process industries, primarily in engineering, operations, and capital management and safety roles. Her unique blend of technical knowledge, when combined with her communication skills, enables her to analyze complex organizational issues and to offer potential solutions. She has participated in high-profile investigations, including the Columbia Shuttle Accident Investigation Board, where Deborah served as an expert consultant in safety culture. She went on to work with NASA as a member of its Aerospace Safety Advisory Panel. Additionally, Deborah has served on 2 National Academy of Science panels to draft policy, facility operational, and closure protocols for the U.S. Army's Chemical Weapons Demilitarization Program. As an engineering and operations leader, her experience with DuPont in process safety and construction and in contractor safety supports her work. Deborah, I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Thank you very much, Megan. Thank you, Megan, and thank you very much to the Pennsylvania Patient Safety Authority for this opportunity to share with you some of the learnings that I have had over the years on a few subjects that are important to us. I think you'll find whether you work in ambulatory care, a nursing home, a doctor's office, a hospital, or any other outpatient kind of facility, that many of the subjects that we're going to touch on today are ready and apply to you. I'd like to also honor the great work done by this Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for their work with respect to patient safety laws and transparency, because as you'll see in some of my examples, transparency becomes extremely important when one has to deal with very short time frames and difficult decisions. So let's move on and talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. I'm not going to read the slides, but you can see very quickly that we're going to start with a safety moment, because this is something DuPont does to sort of center us on any meeting greater than 3 people. It centers the room and brings everybody's attention to the table. Some key thoughts, going to very brief DuPont safety history, talk about safety, safety culture, and then high reliability, and pull some lessons from my world and some, I believe, some disasters that are familiar to you from the public sphere, and then a little bit and take your questions, a little bit of summary and take your questions. The safety moment. Don't know if you know, but ears are very important things. I'm sure you'd all agree with that. When people start to lose their hearing, that is a serious life issue that has to be addressed. Hearing damage, though, and this is an engineer's view of a scale, hearing damage starts to occur at 80 decibels. Normal conversation is only 70 decibels. And so it's important for us to be sensitive to that. The good news is we have many tools today, like smartphone apps, to help tell us about decibels. And so I would encourage you to do that, to make people that you love aware. And if you happen to know folks that like to wear earphones, as many of the younger population does these days, the millennials and college students, it is important to make sure that they keep that volume down so that they don't damage their ears, because it is about intensity and duration. The numbers, as you can see in the red stop sign on the lower left, are just too much that, you know, we should be able to, we can afford as a society. We can do better than this. So let's talk about how staff safety focus supports patient safety results. There's been numerous studies in the around. There was a 2016 study by AON and ASHRM around professional liability of hospital and physicians, and they found in this study that there's a correlation between patient safety and worker safety. In 2011, in the Journal of Patient Safety, they actually found that higher employee safety climate scores were positively associated with 9 patient safety culture measures that were examined in a positive correlation. So there is something here. And I think one of the things that I worry about as a user of hospitals and someone who works with healthcare, that it's really critical to make sure that we are looking at safety in a very holistic way. Patient safety is extremely important, especially if you're the patient or the patient's family. It's also very important for the healthcare giver to know that they've done a good job and they've made that patient in the best possible position when they leave the facility, whatever facility, they leave the facility in the best possible way to take good care of themselves. And so, but what we see, at least what I see when I go around and visit, is staff safety does not get the same level of attention as patient safety when one looks at the C-suite of many healthcare facilities or companies. In DuPont, since we've been giving away safety services for a long time, we started working with some hospitals, and they found some interesting results, and these are a part of those. A hospital in Indiana moved to the top 5% in quality outcomes nationwide due to focus on staff safety and leadership culture. Because in the end, ladies and gentlemen, it's all about leadership. A Wisconsin hospital uses staff safety observation techniques to drive their work on lean to help bring successful outcomes. A large hospital chain reduced worker comp claims by millions of dollars. And we'll show you later what that really translates to for the hospital, for one hospital. What does that start to look like? And saw their claims drop by 20 to 30% within the first 18 months. That means, and their patient safety outcomes improved, but in my view, that means 20 to 30 fewer staff, nurses primarily, were being hurt. And that's important to me because you can't burn through nurses. Nurses are very precious commodities, and you got to be careful. The hospital administration, I believe, has to exercise due care in how they look at their employee base and the sustainability of their employee base. So a little bit about DuPont safety history. Very briefly, DuPont is an old company, started 215 years ago, making explosives. So DuPont had to be safe or DuPont wasn't going to be in business. Safety statistics started being transmitted and communicated to the employees and counted in 1912. There was a belief that all injuries are preventable, and that was developed in the 1940s. And DuPont developed the goal of zero in the 1990s. Paul O'Neill served on the DuPont board, and it was very fortunate for DuPont because he brought that knowledge from his work at Alcoa and from the Pittsburgh system. DuPont has some safety beliefs. All injuries are preventable. Zero is possible. Very difficult to achieve, but possible. Management is accountable for safety. Everyone is responsible for safety. Why is management accountable? Let me just focus on that for a moment. Management is accountable because management is in charge of priorities in the organization, management is in charge of resources, and management is in charge of staffing and the actual organization focus. So management is ultimately accountable for the safety of the organization And I will also say for the patient safety of the organization. And that's any management, no matter where. Off-the-job safety is essential. Why? Because our brains don't work on, oh, I'm at work now, so I have to be safe. Or, oh, I'm not at work now, so I don't have to worry about being safe. None, as you can see, both of those don't work. The brain doesn't work like that. And for the neurologists in the area, you know that the brain doesn't switch off and on when it comes to how it thinks about things. It's more of a continuum. People have to be trained in safety. Good communications are absolutely essential. And I made the comment about leadership, and I'll make the comment about leadership again. DuPont has 12 elements of safety management. You can see very quickly that in the center, highlighted in red, is felt leadership, and that's the key one. If you can have all the other ones, you can have good training, you can have good management review, you can have good communications, you can have good talent management, but if you don't have good leadership, there are problems. And I will tell you, we've tested these 12 elements in hospitals and in long-term care facilities, and they all fit. These are general management, safety management sort of system elements. They all fit. So let's talk a little bit about safety and safety culture. You know, if you're one of the doubting Thomases out there around employee or staff safety, you might ask the question, why do I have to worry about this? And I would say, well, there's two reasons. One is it's costing you money and you may not know it. Or two, it's costing you goodwill as exemplified by the heart. And you may not know that either. And so the key is, I don't care where you show up on that continuum from dollars to heart, just that you get on board and that you engage. And dive into this because it is important. Here's some Bureau of Statistics, labor statistics, safety data on injuries. And when I saw this chart, I was shocked that hospitals and healthcare outside of hospitals, meaning doctor's office, ambulatory care, nursing homes, are more dangerous from an injury rate standpoint. More people per 100, so to speak, or per 1,000 employees are getting hurt in hospitals and healthcare than in the construction industry or the mining industry. To me, that's unconscionable when a healthcare facility of any sort is there to take care of people and help make them as comfortable as possible or as well as they possibly can be. Take a look at back injuries, the most impactful, especially for nurses. Patients don't come with handles. And it's very difficult to manage. Not just that, they become very expensive. And while many healthcare facilities track the direct costs, and you'll see there the direct cost roughly $35,000 per injury, the indirect cost can sometimes be 3 to 4 times as much, especially when it involves perhaps surgery or long time out of work, requiring replacement workers, or perhaps, injuries and litigation associated with the injury. All of that fits in here. And these are all preventable. That's the sad thing. So pretend you're in a hospital now, and this hospital has, say, 2,350 employees. Based on the charts we just saw, the average number of injuries per employees in any given year is 6 employees, 6.4, but we won't count that. We'll just say 6 employees are going to be hurt for every 100 employees. And if we take a very reasonable cost for direct costs of, say, $16,000 per injury, rounded up, the possible cost per year for that one hospital alone is almost $2.4 million. You can do a whole lot with $2.4 million. You can hire 43 nurses. You can install 235 new beds, buy 235 new beds, 469 IV pumps, and move on through the rest of the chart. So this is a business proposition for those who say, oh, I don't believe in the soft stuff. That's okay. The money talks. So how does staff safety tie to patient safety? I believe that caregivers need to feel safe in their environment in order to do their best work. And that's both emotionally and physically. They have to know that someone's got their back. In order to give great, outstanding care, those of you who do that on a daily basis know your mind has to be totally focused on your patients. And be focused and not worried about much anything else, but making sure that they get good care. And that you're thinking in front of what's going on with them so that you can help them get that. There are many different types of safety. There's electrical safety. There's hand safety. There's lifting safety. There's sharps. There's patient safety. There's good communications. All of these are related, and they all must fit together. And I'm of the belief that nurses should never, ever have to sacrifice their own health and well-being for excellent patient outcomes. Now, I realize in some nursing schools that is treated that you are expected to do that, and you may be taught that. But I believe that is thinking that needs to be changed. Patient-centered care requires cohesiveness between the management and the care staff. And the management, if it's not looking at the safety of the care staff, is missing a whole large piece. If you look at all the stuff above of how can they give better patient-centered care. So what is safety culture? In DuPont, it's very simple. It's how we behave and what we do when no one's looking. And we end up talking about shortcuts, where culture's trumping procedures. Even if the procedure's bad, why isn't it fixed? So that everybody can benefit from it. Why do we allow that to happen? And that happens across industries, not just healthcare and not just the chemical industry. What does a good culture look like? What does a bad one look like? How is management involved? Management's involved because they're totally accountable. And my experience is you can have the greatest procedures, you can have the greatest and smartest personnel, but if you have a poor culture, it will eat your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Here's a way to look at it, because everybody just talks about culture, but let's look what's underneath culture. And this chart is really wonderful because let's focus on the bottom line. If your organization and you have an aligned vision, if you're competent, if there's enough people to do the work, if they're doing the right work with the right kind of plans and procedures, and there's the right kind of incentives, both positive and negative incentives, you have what's called motivated staff, motivated employees. If one of those are missing, you can see you don't have the right kind of incentives or pay, you have folks who are cynical. If people don't have the right kind of plan, they're disorganized. If you don't have enough people, you get frustrated because you're all doing the best you can do, etc. So those are the kind of components that start to make up safety culture. And I'm sorry, when I look across that bottom line, all of that looks like management type of activity to me. And I bet it looks like that to you too. Because who makes the decisions on all of that stuff? So let's take a look at how does one get to a culture, and the fact that culture, to make it even more difficult, never stands still. You can't say, oh, we have a good culture and we're going to have a good culture next year. There's no guarantees, or even next month, because culture is always changing. It's either going up, getting better, or getting worse. And this is a way to begin to look at injuries and think about level of injuries. When you have safety as a choice, your injury levels are generally lower, and this has been proven out by many studies at many locations in the last 50 years. Can quote you a chapter and book on this, that by moving from safety by accident through to safety as a choice or safety by choice, you see the changes that start to happen in the organization and in the thinking of the people in the organization. That's the key. So what has to change is what's going on and how you think about it, right in there between your two ears. So if you look to the bottom there, this is how, on the left, is how most healthcare facilities think of safety. There's patient safety, which gets a lot of attention, and staff safety, which gets somewhat less attention. To have to move through this transformation of your culture so that safe people and safe patients come together in an integrated way. And then it's Katie bar the door. Hospital performance goes up. Employee or nurse morale and staff morale goes up. The patients are happier. They get better care. It all works. Not just one thing. It all works. Here's how a culture could evolve. From a current thought, well, injuries are unavoidable. People are going to get hurt, and there's not much we can do about that, to all injuries are preventable. From this independent, well, I take care of my safety, to we take care of our safety. It's much more important to have people working in an interdependent way when it comes to safety, because we are not always at the top of our game when hopefully other people are, and they can help us be safe. My hospital focuses on safety compliance, to my hospital aspires to world-class holistic safety performance. And then to the point of we only investigate very serious kinds of sentinel events, to we investigate near misses and other areas, because we don't want to hurt someone to have to learn something. I can tell you that over the years, the DuPont safety standards have been written in the blood of the employees that have been hurt. And so part of my comments to you today are in honor of their sacrifices and their family sacrifices. Let's talk a little bit about high reliability and then get into some examples. Highly reliable organizations are very aware and conscious of what is their work process. And if it's not good, they fix it. They're also okay with complexity, because the stuff that I do every day when I'm talking about working in a refinery or in a chemical plant with highly hazardous materials, and the stuff that you do every day working with highly hazardous materials in sometimes different volumes, and dealing with the complexity of an ever-changing patient and an organism, meaning the human body that continues to change, and you're monitoring it and adjusting your protocols and your procedures and what you do as the body changes and recovers. You cannot simplify. We must address the complexity and not try to dumb it down, because in dumbing it down, we will make mistakes. We have to be paranoid for failure, always worried about procedural drift or something that looks weird. Those are gifts. When something appears strange and someone sees it, that's a gift. We must defer to expertise and take the time, if we can, to defer to expertise. Granted, this is very difficult in an emergency room of a hospital. But if it's possible, that's really the way to deal with it. And you have to be resilient and relentless. And that takes support of leaders that understand, have been there, and care. All of that is critical. Felt leadership is demonstrating your personal commitment in taking actions for the well-being of people. This is DuPont's definition. So that your leadership, if you're the CEO, if you're the head of a unit, your leadership permeates the organization even when you're not there. Because people know what they need to do and what is the expectation. Felt leadership involves employees at all levels, and it's a building block in generating trust. And when you have high trust in an organization, you have much better performance, you have better handoffs, you can ask questions in a handoff without a problem. It works all the way around. Now we're going to take a look at the 2 shuttle accidents and 1 industrial oil and gas incident and talk about safety culture. In the Columbia Accident Board report, everybody said, well, yeah, it was the foam. But I'm going to prove to you that it was more than the foam. The actual incidents, both incidents were related with respect to organizational culture. So let's look at the Challenger. Not too long ago, January 28th, 1986, the launch was behind schedule. It was cold. There was ice that formed on the pad. There was a flawed decision-making process in the management chain. There's a jet stream above the pad. The O-ring failed, and 7 people died, including the teacher, Krista McCullough. Was this totally preventable? Yes. The Rogers Commission, which was the group that studied the Challenger, said that NASA had known about damage from O-rings and damage to O-rings for a long time. They tolerated it. Why? Well, nothing bad has happened yet. If you ever find anybody you work with saying that, that's a warning sign. The solid rocket boost experts had expressed concerns about the safety of the Challenger launch. So the people who know the most about the rockets, once you turn on a solid rocket booster, you can't shut it off. There's no switch. It's just going to burn out, or you're going to have to blow it up. And so we really should have deferred to the technical expert. And what did the technical expert tell him that day? Technical expert was right there at the Kennedy Space Center, said, don't launch. We recommend not launching. That engineer was overruled by his manager because NASA put pressure on him. NASA's culture prevented these concerns from reaching the top decision makers. There was a whole bunch of communication going on, but the people ultimately accountable were clueless about what was going on due to communication patterns and culture within the NASA organization and between NASA and its contractor. So if you are dealing with service providers, how can you ensure that they have the same culture that you do when they come into their facilities? And we have many cases of patient safety incidents that have occurred and staff safety incidents that have occurred because a vendor or a service provider came in, didn't understand the environment they were walking into, did the wrong thing erroneously, and caused harm. Past successes had created an environment of overconfidence. This was 47 shuttle flight. They'd been running for 5 years at roughly 4 to 5 shuttles a year. This was, whoa, rock and roll, baby. We're on this. That creates complacency. Where was that paranoia we just talked about? Excuse me, you're going into space. And transitions from space, and it's important to note, if you look at the Russian program, if you look at the Chinese program, if you look at the U.S. space programs, the statistics are the facts. No one, zero people have died in space. Everybody's died in the Russian program and in the U.S. program, going up, coming down, or practicing. No one has died in space. So the engineers got the steady state pretty well, but the transitions are difficult. So let's look at Columbia. Launch. 16 plus 16 days occurred near the end of the launch. This was the foam had fallen off 81 seconds into the flight. Now, most of the foam falls off the shuttle right when it comes off the pad. The shuttle is barely moving at that point. At 81 seconds into the flight, though, the shuttle is moving 5,000 miles an hour. And the piece of foam, to show you how much damage was done, the piece of foam was about the size of a milk carton, a half-gallon sized milk carton, the old cardboard type. It was about that size, weighed a little less than a pound. But traveling at 5,000 miles an hour, if it hit any of us in the midsection, it would rip us apart. That's what the engineers knew. So when this foam fell off at 81 seconds into the flight, and you can see from the pictures that it's getting to be space because it's pretty black. The sky's not blue anymore. There was a problem. The engineers knew it. They asked for pictures 8 times during the 16 days of this flight. The mission manager for this flight was on vacation. You would go, huh? Well, this was a not so special flight. I had the opportunity to have a conversation with the late Sally Ride, the first American woman in space. She and I were in a conversation, and she looked at me and she said, it's the same crap all over again. I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, it was the B team. I said, explain to me. She said, well, we have 2 mission management teams. We have an A team and a B team. And the A team is a more experienced team, and they deal with the more difficult missions. And the B team is the training team, sort of like. They step in and help the A team on occasion so that they work their way through. But they decided to give this mission to the B team. And I looked at her, I said, why? She said, there was no satellite launch. There was no rendezvous with the space station. There was no spacewalk. It was just go up, fly around a few times, do a few experiments, and come back. So there was, quote unquote, nothing really dangerous in the mindset of the NASA people. And I'm like, nothing really dangerous? In an environment of absolute zero and, you know, no pressure, no oxygen, there's nothing dangerous about space? So the shuttle disintegrated on reentry because the engineers never got their pictures, and 7 more people died. And I got an opportunity to meet Sally Ride and a whole bunch of other people that growing up in suburban Chicago, Illinois, I never thought I'd have an opportunity to do so. And I'll tell you that what gave me probably the greatest opportunity for me to contribute to my country was on the backs and on the families of 7 dead astronauts, a second time, for some of the same reasons. And I'll tell you, folks, there's nothing nice about that. I got other words, but I'm being taped, so I got to be careful. What did the cave find? NASA had long known about these foam damage dangers. Nothing bad has happened yet. It was viewed as a turnaround issue, not as a flight safety issue. They were thinking about it incorrectly. Turnaround meaning getting the shuttle ready to go again. They didn't see as what this could do to the shuttle itself, basically blow a hole in the wing. The engineers had expressed concerns about this 8 times during the launch and the subsequent flight. No deference to the technical experts. Mission management team, they didn't have, well, there's no satellite nearby. They could have taken a defense satellite out of its orbit and gotten the photographs. This was totally preventable. Another shuttle was close to being ready to go. They could have put the other shuttle with a minimal crew. They had enough space suits. They could have moved them, and they could have disintegrated the Columbia or blown it up, or probably disintegrated it on reentry to make it burn up. That could have been done, and those lives could have been saved. NASA's culture prevented these concerns from reaching top decision makers. There were communication patterns issues, obviously. There were cultural issues. There was the B team. It was a very sterile environment. The mission management team met every day at the start of the day, in Eastern U.S. or Central U.S. time. And I asked questions, and they said, the engineers want pictures. Every day they got the engineers want pictures. But no one gave the mission team leader any context either. It was just a very sterile communication. No one said, hey, Linda, there's 96 people crammed into a conference room for 20. They're standing up, they're halfway down the hall, and they're all screaming they want pictures. Now, if the mission manager had been told that, maybe the thought would have been different. But all she got was, the engineers want pictures. Very clipped, very sterile communication. And again, past successes created an environment of overconfidence, and there were leadership issues from the fact that it's okay to send our mission managers on a vacation because, well, it was his anniversary and this wasn't anything important. I think all shuttle flights are important. Anytime you put someone at risk, it's important. Anytime someone comes in to an emergency room, it's important. Anytime someone falls in a nursing home, it's important. So to show that it's not just space that has these problems, let's talk about BP Deepwater Horizon. 11 people died. There was a severe environmental incident. It was a well blowout. The supervisor was inexperienced. This was the deepest well under the ground in the deepest water that BP had ever did. There was time and budget pressure to complete. Procedures weren't followed. There were accountability issues, weren't getting the help from on shore because there hadn't been a problem yet. There was, nothing big had happened yet, not a big problem. So there was some arrogance around and a lack of oversight from some of the technical folks. What did the U.S. Department of Interior find in their investigation? This well had kicked before. The rig crew knew this well was a problem. But, nothing bad had happened yet. Rig management and BP management staffed this rig with relatively new and inexperienced people, and there was not good connection to the technical people. And now if you watch the BP commercials that you might see on television, they talk about how they've increased communication with the technical experts on shore. That's good. BP's culture prevented the concerns from reaching top decision makers. Again, because of how the organization flowed and its culture, the people who really could stop this and authorize the extra money were not in the decision-making loop. And again, there was overconfidence because, it was BP refining that had all the problems. BP upstream was fine. So there were at the top issues where leaders weren't paying much attention to safety. And ultimately, the CEO was asked to step down. So let's take a look at this list that was put together by the Joint Commission around Sentinel events when they identified root causes. Human factors was in a large portion of them. Leadership with respect to planning and other things, communications, assessment. The top ones fit most of these three examples we talked about. And I think you'd find that this is the same in any other industry too. Why? Because we're all in organizations. Organizations have similar flaws, and we're all human, and we make mistakes. The important thing, you can never fix the human. The human's going to do the best it can, and quite frankly, humans do pretty well. The question is, you got to work on the systems. Those 12 elements I talked about is just one of the key safety systems. So what you need is proactive behavior at all levels of the organization all the time. You have to have systemic issues, since they're similar, you have to learn from others and act and improve. You're never done. You can never quit. when I work with organizations, I tell them this is the forever agenda. So if someone says, oh, well, we're going to work on safety now for the next 3 years, and then we'll get it, and then we'll be done with it, I laugh because I say, it doesn't work like that. When you stop working on safety, it starts getting worse immediately. We always have to remember who we're serving. And we have multiple constituencies. So it's important to make sure that we take care of all of that. And I'll tell you, if you take care of the staff, they'll take care of the patients, and that'll take care of the community. This is marathon work. This is not a sprint. You got to have good leadership. It has to be consistent over time. You can't have sort of, oh, we got a good CEO now, and then you have a bad CEO who doesn't do anything on safety. It'll all degrade during that period of time. If it's, and I've seen safety go from pretty good to lousy in a few months, just based on some bad leadership conversations, some bad leadership comments and actions. It's important for all of us to do the hard work because lives rest in the balance, whether it's in my industry or yours. And as someone who has been a patient in the past, you can tell I asked a lot of questions. I think I drove my nurses nuts. But I would tell you that could our patient safety progress be impacted because our staff is worried about getting injured? I think yes. And so it's up to us to go fix that. Because in the end, whether you are the nurse in this photograph, the orderly that's down the hall, the doctor that's in surgery, the hospital CEO, the head of HR for the hospital, you will get the level of safety performance that you demonstrate that you are willing to accept. That's about your leadership, my leadership, everybody's leadership.
Deborah, I want to thank you. That was a fabulous presentation. That was very informative, contained valuable information I think everybody can use in their organization. And this does conclude our slide presentation portion of the program, but we would like to open this up to question and answer period. I do have a question that did come in that I can start with. It says, I am a nurse in an ambulatory care facility. What is the most important thing that I can do to get something like this started in my location?
Oh, that's a great question. And it would go for, this is not just for the nurse in the ambulatory care facility, but anybody anywhere. The first thing you can do is make a personal commitment that you will never walk by something that you think is unsafe, either for you or for your colleagues or for the patient ever again. That's the first thing, is make that commitment that you won't let it pass. You'll either make a note of it and act on it when you can, or you'll act on it immediately. You just won't let it go. That's the leadership that we need. And you might say, oh, there's so much. Every day, there's just so much. You'd be surprised when you start working on it and everybody helps, how quickly that list gets smaller.
Thank you. I do have one that came in from a long-term care facility. This question says, with new OSHA regs, we cannot base our safety incentive program around lack of employee injury. So the question is, how do your businesses provide incentives to your staff to promote a safer work environment?
What you do is very simply, instead of dealing with the lagging indicator, meaning the injury, and then, because otherwise what you get, what OSHA's trying to say is what I call in my business bloody hands in the pocket. So if I cut myself, it's going to hurt the performance. That means we're all going to get less money in the old system. What you have to worry about is leading indicators. And so I would go back to your nursing home staff leaders and say, we want, if you're going to incent us on doing the stuff right, understanding, let's get the work process right, let's get the admittance process right, let's get the handoff process right, and incent us for doing those kinds of things right. And what then happens is the outcomes generally take care of themselves. So you switch your incentive program from lagging indicators to leading indicators.
I have another question. It says, we recently had an incident where a staff member decided to transfer a resident, I'm assuming this might be a nursing home, using a hydraulic lift by herself. The sling was not properly placed. The resident slid out and suffered a severe head injury and deceased. Since then, our culture feels very tense, and I guess she's just asking for your response to that.
That's a very normal response. I would say someone who has some accountability for the organization should stand up and, first of all, not blame anyone. What we have to do is pledge to recommit that this never happens again and move forward with the understanding of the fact that this person has given us some additional knowledge. And so you have to ask questions around how the sling not being properly placed was there good training? Was there demonstrated training? Or did folks just have to watch a video? Did they have to practice moving people? Did they in their practice, did they practice moving each other? You know, when we deal with safety procedures, we sometimes ask people to demonstrate those safety procedures, like with CPR. No one would ever give you a certification for CPR without having to practice it on a dummy or, preferably a dummy, never a real thing. But this notion of how did we practice that? So I would have a lot of questions, but I would say that the management ultimately is accountable. It's not the nurse's fault. The management is accountable to make sure everybody's appropriately trained. I give them credit and kudos that they have the lifting equipment installed. Not every place has that. So good job there. I think that now you have to go the next step and make sure everybody's appropriately trained. And that's how I would start on that. I would have some questions of the management, and that's where I would look first. You have to assume that no one wants to hurt anybody, and no one wants to get hurt on the job. And that's why zero is so important as a way to think about this, because I don't know anybody. If I sit there and I said, oh, okay, based on statistics, we're going to hurt 6 people in this hospital this month, or in the nursing home, 6 people. If there's 100 people in the nursing home, we're going to hurt 6 people this month. Which one of you are going to stand up and volunteer to be hurt? That's you can't have those kinds of conversations. You have to have the zero. So I go have a conversation with the management first.
Deborah, I have a question that just came up. It says, does your organization have a safety coach or safety coaches or champions, a program to keep safety culture momentum going? And if so, could you briefly describe?
Sure, we do. We have we've done this a lot. We have people who have long-term DuPont experience who go and spend time in clients' locations, and we work at the ground floor level with whoever is there. So I personally have coached engineers and nursing staff. I've also coached CEOs and hospital execs on behavior, things to say and not say, things that can get misinterpreted. On nurses, how to have a difficult conversation, how to keep the energy up, those kinds of things. I can talk a long time on that subject, so I'll truncate my comments right there.
Okay. I have another one. Any ideas about how we might soften this blow and allow employees to feel safe? Management response has been to increase the number of residents requiring 2 persons tenfold, and staff numbers are not there. And I think when they're talking residents, they mean nursing home residents. It seems like that might be a nursing home question.
I'm going to assume that this is the same person who submitted the question before. The first thing management has to do is get everybody together, and as much as possible, might have to do it in a couple different meetings, but get everybody together and tell them that it wasn't their fault, because it wasn't. We're going to learn from this. They have to commit to learn from this, and they have to agree in their own hearts and minds. And sometimes you need someone from outside telling the management this. They have to agree in their own hearts and minds that they don't want to have this again, because they can't afford this as a business. It's not right what happened, and it's certainly a loss for the family, but it's definitely also a loss for the staff and for everybody else. You just can't afford this. So just increasing the number of residents, that's not getting at the root of the problem, in my view. This would be what I would do, is I would go back, and I would go back to the investigation, and I would dig more into the investigation. I'd come up with learnings that are much deeper than just increasing the number of residents requiring 2 people to move them.
So here's an interesting question that just came in. I think we still have a minute or two. During our last safety committee meeting, our new regional director stated that she would like to get our safety committee certified. What is the difference, certified versus non-certified?
There are so many certifications, I would need to understand that. There is there's a credential called a Certified Safety Professional, CSP. That may be one of the certifications. That requires some training, some book learning, and an exam. There are other kinds of requirements with respect to other certifications depending on what you're looking at. So let me just answer that one on that piece. And what's the difference being certified versus non-certified? It's depending on your background, it could be nothing. Depending on, it could be a lot. It's hard. That second part of that question is hard to answer, because I don't know what is the safety committee being referred to.
Right. And if it's patient safety, there is a CPPS, Certified Professional in Patient Safety, that's available out there as well. Just throwing that out there.
Oh, great. Okay, super.
I think maybe one last question. It says, as a nurse educator, I train all the time, but only 50% of nursing staff continue safety competencies, citing staff challenges for workarounds.
And the question is how to do it.
So I think she's saying that she's training all the time, but they're not. They're doing workarounds. So
sure.
Is there some other element?
Yep. First of all, people do workarounds sometimes because they don't know what the real procedure is. If they are still doing workarounds, you have to go ask them why they're not. And they might tell you the procedure's too complex, or we could do it a better way. Well, listen to what they have to say, and then work to make the procedure better. Inside DuPont, we have what we call job cycle checks. And once every 3 years, every job is reviewed by the people who do the work. Looking at the procedure, and we pay overtime for people to come in on shift. If we have 4 people who do this job in a given plant, we'll bring them all in, they'll sit down together, and they'll talk about it for an hour or so about, well, this is the procedure. How many of you really do the job this way still? And that's how you catch a little bit of the procedural drift or the shortcuts. And then you say, well, what's wrong with this procedure? Because what has changed? something is changed, and something's always changing in healthcare too, because there's always a technology change that's sometimes driving a procedural change. You have a new, like when the EMR came in, procedures had to change because now you have a different way to record information and a different way to communicate. So those kinds of things, you have to step back and periodically look at your procedures and change them, and that's something you might want to consider doing.
Thanks, Deborah. This concludes our webinar. Thank you.